Hello, I'm Catherine Weatherburn, the founder of Safetyknot, and we work with construction companies and organisations who have construction elements to their projects, and this is with the aim to promote safety and to prevent injury. In this video, we have put together some training tips and advice from the educators that we work with from around the world, and we hope that you may want to consider using some of these tips when delivering your training to the communities that you work with. Now, I want to emphasise that you're in charge of a training space. You know your participants best, you know your community best, and you'll likely know if your community fully understands the risks they are taking, but they choose not to follow safety practices, either due to preference or perhaps due to other factors which may or may not be in their control. Or perhaps they're not aware of what safety practices they should be taking and what is available to them. You'll also know what approaches to training you think will be most suitable to use in the context that you're delivering your training in. So let's start by talking about confidence. Sometimes delivering training, especially if it's to colleagues or to other trainers, can be really daunting. And that's why sounding confident is so important. And this is where projecting your voice can really help. To project your voice, this is a tip here, identify a target or an object and direct your voice towards it. For example, this might be a wall, a window, an object on the other side of the room, or if you're outside, perhaps it's a tree or a building. You'll notice that when you give your voice a target to aim for, you'll naturally project and speak louder. Now think about filling the room or the space that you're speaking in. You need to speak with enough clarity and volume to fill the space, but you don't want to be shouting in a small training room, for example. So the same power of voice projection is not required as in a large training hall. So thinking about this should help you control the level and the intensity of projection that you need to use. Now, since your sound comes from within, struggling with confidence can greatly inhibit your ability or even your willingness to project your voice. But don't let fear have the final say. Your training is really important. Your participants want to hear what you have to say and always believe in your ability to make a sound worth sharing. But if you're ever in doubt, remember, find your focus, direct your voice towards it, and hear how confident you sound. As well as the volume of our voice, as trainers, we also need to think about our pace and our clarity. When we feel nervous, we tend to speed up, we speak faster. So just try to be mindful of this and try to speak slowly and clearly. If there is a colleague in the training with you, you could perhaps ask them to subtly give you a prearranged sign or signal to let you know you're speaking too quickly and to try to slow down. If you're ever in doubt of what pace you should be using as a trainer, why not record yourself practicing and see what pace you speak at naturally? This can be a really helpful training tool for you as a trainer, as well as being mindful to speak slower. Saying less is often more, as is keeping your language clear and simple. So I remember when I was training to be a teacher and my lessons were being observed, I kept getting told TTT, which first of all, I didn't know what it meant. I very quickly found out it meant too much trainer talk. So it turned out when I was nervous, I would say exactly what I was thinking, including if I dropped my pen or if my PowerPoint wasn't working. I would tell everyone exactly what I was thinking. But participants don't need to know this. They don't need to know I've dropped my pen. They can see it. They don't need to know my PowerPoint isn't working. They can see it. So just pick up your pen or just leave it. Just calmly sort out your PowerPoint, but don't narrate what you're doing. Another experience I remember having when I was training as a trainer was that I used to feel really uncomfortable when a session went quiet. I would panic inside and I would try to fill the silence with talking, again leading to the feedback of TTT, too much trained talking. But be mindful of this and make sure you give participants enough time. Sometimes as a trainer, it can feel quite awkward if there is silence, but allow adequate time for your participants to think about the question that you've asked them. Remember, you already know the question you're going to ask them. You've already been prepping your session, you've been thinking about it in advance, but they don't. So make sure you leave an intentional pause after you ask a question and allow participants maybe 1 or even 2 minutes, depending on what you've asked them, to think about their answer. If at that point they're still silent, then it perhaps suggests there's a problem and they need some support. So perhaps prompt or rephrase the question, but try not to be afraid of silence. So we briefly talked about confidence, your confidence, but what about your participants' confidence? Well, participants may feel apprehensive or nervous when joining a training session. So be aware of this and try to be as welcome and as friendly as possible to create an accessible training environment. In our experience as trainers, we found that participants will engage more when they feel relaxed and accepted, which will also make your life as a trainer easier. So I also find that establishing a training etiquette before you start your training is really helpful. So in some of our trainings, for example, we ask that if people are using mobile phones, we ask that they take their call outside the room if there's something important that they need to tend to. Now, this kind of clarification at the beginning of the training avoids the awkwardness of having to single someone out in your training, or perhaps if you're training your superiors, then you've already established these ground rules in advance. Now, to build participants' confidence, you can encourage them to share their own experiences and stories. We find that this really contextualizes the training, particularly if you're talking about risk in construction sites. People will be able to bring their own stories to the session, and this brings an element of familiarity to the training. And this can be particularly important if participants are not used to participating in training. So, depending on who you're training, people may have never participated in the training before, and they may feel nervous. So, training can also be more effective when participants are active rather than passive. This is where the use of interactive activities and tools can be really helpful. So, an interactive training tool that you could use is asking participants a simple yes no question and asking them to show you their answers. So, rather than saying yes no, they physically show you with their body. So, for example, you could label one side of the room as being yes, the other side of the room as being no. When you ask the question, you ask participants to move with their feet, to tell you their answers, and to physically move to show you yes or no. Bringing movement into training is a great way to get participants active, engaged, and especially if they've just eaten lunch, they might be feeling a bit tired. It's a great way to shake things up. Another interactive method, if you're asking yes, no answers, or if you have two set answers to a question, are to hold up red or green cards. So you give participants the red and green cards, a bit like in football, and you ask them a question, and they hold up, for example, the red card for no, or the green card for yes. It could be that you do this with hands, raising of hands if you don't have cards available. It could be that someone sits up and sits down. Obviously, you know your participants best, and you'll know whether these are appropriate methods or not to use. Another way to answer questions is so that participants aren't singled. This is another way to answer questions so that participants aren't singled out, and this can build their confidence, making them more likely to participate. If you single people out, it can make them feel nervous and less comfortable to participate or to answer questions. Now, you may find you've got the opposite problem. You may find that you have one or two participants who are really eager to answer all questions, and they may answer them really quickly. So it means that it's hard for others to participate and to try to answer. So this is why using some of these yes-no techniques can make sure that everyone's included, rather than just one participant being so actively involved. Now, you can, of course, ask further questions so that there's the opportunity for participants to expand their answers past yes, no. But having a way that you can include everyone rather than just one or two people is helpful. And this, again, is where establishing ground rules at the beginning can be really helpful, because you can tell people that you want them to raise their hand or to signal to you that they have an answer. Or you could just say to people, let's just give everyone 20 seconds to think of an answer. Who has an answer? Another tool that can make your training run smoothly is team training. Sometimes two can be better than one, especially during multiple day training. It can get a bit boring or repetitive if you just have one person delivering all the training. Using team training can keep the energy high and participants engaged. And this is a really effective tool in our experience when it's done correctly. But to do this correctly and to make sure that team teaching runs smoothly, we've got some more tips for you. So plan this together with an agenda so that you're both on the same page before you start your training. Decide who's going to do what and when. Recognize and play to each other's strengths. For example, one of you might be fantastic with public speaking. That might be what you really like to do. The other might be better with supporting participants. Or one of you might be really good at keeping energy high. Think about what are your strengths and how can you use these to your advantage. Make sure that you always coordinate with your fellow trainer so you do not interrupt or talk over one another. But whether you're delivering training on your own or as part of a team, it's vital to be prepared. Before delivering any training, run through the session in your mind and make sure you're as prepared as you can be. Have all your training content ready, double check you have everything that you need, including any printing, handouts, materials, pens, and remember to check your technology is working if you're using any. However, we all know even if as prepared as you may be, sometimes things go wrong. If this happens, remain confident. If it's your style as a trainer, joke it off. But the important thing is to move on and don't panic. This is because this is when creating an accessible and friendly training environment works both ways. So, this relaxed atmosphere that you've hopefully created will help you in times like this. And finally, accept that no training is perfect and that sometimes your training won't go as well as you'd have liked it to. Sometimes your energy might be low. Sometimes your participants are pretty quiet. The important thing is to reflect at the end of each training session that you deliver. And if something didn't go quite as well as you'd have liked, think about how could you improve it if you were to do it again. Being a reflexive trainer will help you grow as a trainer, which will benefit your participants. So I hope that some of these training tips and advice that I've shared with you are helpful and that you may want to implement some of these when delivering training to your communities. So I think that that's everything that I've got to share with you in this whirlwind video. And I think all that's left for me to say to you is best of luck with your training.